In this week's 1% Weekly, we ask just how shaky is UK economic growth at the moment? Elite Investor Club member Paul Watson spills the beans on some of the investments he's been making, and we ask, is VAT fair? In the first 3 months of 2018, the UK economy grew by just 0.2%. And this was apparently as a result of slightly increased government and consumer spending. Apparently consumers are dipping into their savings to make up for a lack of increase in other earnings, which is all very well in the short term, but it's not very sustainable. So where are we going with this? Well, normally you'd expect the economy to be growing at a much stronger clip than that. The people that are opposed to Brexit will say this is all to do with the impact of Brexit itself. That's undoubtedly caused a lot of uncertainty. I think quite a few business investments have been slowed down while they wait endlessly for the government to make it clear exactly what Brexit is going to mean. What does it mean in terms of trade with our EU partners, in terms of the free movement of people? What does it mean in terms of whether these companies are going to stay in London and the city or go off to Frankfurt and Paris, etc.? So there's been a lot of uncertainty. It's now 2 years since that referendum, and still it's not clear what's going to happen. We've had the recent spate of government resignations. So really, I'm not sure we're any the wiser as to how the world will look and feel from a business perspective the day after Brexit. But the point is that what it's doing today is really slowing down our economic growth. And consumers cannot keep dipping into their savings. We've already got down to, I think, 4% is the average amount that people are saving these days. And that, a lot of people obviously save absolutely zero. A lot of people in our kind of circles probably save 20, 30, 40 or 50% of their income. So, these averages can be very misleading. But most people are not saving anything like enough. And in fact, what's happening now is they're saving less and they're taking out more from their savings to keep the artificially high standard of living that they can't really afford. And of course, the government's been doing this for decades as we continue to have an annual deficit and a massive national debt that shows no sign of going away anytime soon. So at the moment, clearly, this is not a great time for economic growth in the UK. Investment by business and government is down by 1.3% in the first quarter, with business investment falling 0.4% in that time. And the Office for National Statistics says that the construction industry has contracted by 0.8% in the first quarter. Now, previously they'd said it had contracted by 2.7% in the quarter. So they were only like, 300% wrong with that. So how much we can put on these statistics, I really don't know. But at the moment, clearly, the British economy is going through a wobble. As an investor, that means you've got to look, to diversify abroad. As a business owner, you've got to make sure that you're doing everything you can to keep your costs under control and maintain your margins so that you can survive a period of limited economic growth without having your business threatened by that very slow growth. Now it's time to catch up with Paul Watson, the Elite Investor Club member who's sharing his kind of life story with us over the series of interviews that we're having with him. Today, we turn our attention to some of the weird and wonderful investments he's made since discovering Elite Investor Club. So Paul, we've had a chat about being a member of the club and how that works for you, but obviously at the core of what we do are investments. So tell me a little bit about, the kind of investments that you've looked at and how that's worked for you so far.
Okay. As a new member of the club, obviously the first starting point was to look at the investment opportunities on the website. And when I signed up initially, came to my first event and you were talking about some of those. I understand that those are available to everybody. But I know at the very first networking meeting you referred to some other investments being sort of reserved for high net worth individuals, and I let it be known to the club that I qualified for those criteria, and of course that then opens up other opportunities as well.
Yeah, it's a real dilemma for us because the FCA regulations are that you are not allowed to publicise any kind of investment opportunity that is only available to what they call sophisticated or high net worth investors. So just to be clear, a high net worth investor, according to their definition, is somebody that either earns £100,000 a year or has 250,000 of investable funds outside their main home and pension. Sophisticated investors are a bit more complicated. If you're a director of a company turning over £1 million, you automatically qualify for some bizarre reason. If you're a member of a club like Elite for 6 months and you make a couple of investments in off-market shares, you know, the kind of thing you see on Crowdcube or Cedars, that qualifies you. So once you get into this kind of secret society, we can share by email, phone and direct mail all about these other investments. And to be honest, they are often the most interesting things in the portfolio. So, you know, when people join, one of the first things we try and clarify, and it can be a little bit sensitive, is, you know, do you actually qualify for these other investments? So in your case, obviously, once we knew that you did, and I think it was Adam that was talking to you about them, started sharing information about some of those investments. So just tell me about some of the things that resonated with you and why you found them interesting.
Well, when I came along to one of the meetings, you were giving a presentation about sort of some of the strategies that Elite look at in terms of the things that it will invest in and the things that it won't invest in. And you were talking about mega trends, you know, the population getting older, and that very much resonated with me. So if you look at the things that I've invested in, they would tend to lean more towards that aging population. So for example, it's the very specialist care home facility that is up in the northeast of England, a loan note with one of the builders that you are working with, the developers that you're working with, that is doing specifically retirement accommodation, good quality retirement accommodation, and then of course more recently the burial plots. You know, unfortunately we're all going to get there at some point, and it resonated with me the fact that we're an island, there's not enough space, and therefore that these burial plots would have a capital value that would appreciate over time. So I've done 2 of those investments with you. So it's very much building on the strategy that you felt was appropriate for Elite. Again, resonated with me, and I recall at another one of your networking meetings that you also talked about some of the due diligence that you put in specifically before offering it to the community. Of course, I do my own additional due diligence on top of that, looking into the various organisations and the trends around that. But I like the fact that you were very open as to some of the areas that you covered in your due diligence.
Okay. I think you know, one of the things that has to be said is that, you know, nobody wakes up in the morning thinking I want to invest in a dementia care home or burial plots. You know, some of these things are quite esoteric, you know, borderline weird. Yeah. In fact, I think we're looking at something at the moment that might be coming out which is based around medical cannabis. Right. And another one that will be based around cryptocurrencies. So, you know, there's always something new and different out there. And I guess from your own perspective, you've probably looked at some of the things in the portfolio and thought, nah, that's not for me.
Absolutely. I mean, I know that you've done some both education and investments in the art world. I have to say I'm a complete Luddite when it comes to the art side of things. So unfortunately, that's not something that I know anything about or have a drive to educate myself on. So that, for example, is an area where I wouldn't. Medical cannabis, I might have to try some first, let's see. So looking at my investments, I was quite heavy into the bricks and mortar side of it with our own business and residential portfolio, and also with the investments in the retirement accommodation and the specialist care home. So I was looking for other things, and hence the burial plots. But also more recently, just about to do the investment in the foreign exchange arbitrage bond, which then will at least I'll have some funds in the foreign exchange sector as well. So that appealed to us to spread that.
Okay, and also I think one of the things that we try and do is to have a range of options where some things are giving a capital gain that you can use, to offset your capital gains tax allowance. Some are giving a income, regular income like the Forex bond. Others are giving a lump of update, like a big payback at the end of a project, say like the retirement apartments one. So that way you can kind of structure your portfolio to provide a mixture of income, capital gains and longer term benefits.
That was really important to us, actually, and specifically that was one of the reasons why we did the burial plots for that capital gain, because in our current position we weren't doing anything to maximise the capital gains allowance. And so whilst the Forex is going to give us additional income, we obviously have our own business providing that income. It made sense for us to shelter the income there within our pension structure to make that tax efficient, but then to do the burial plots outside that where both Carol and I could benefit from the capital gains.
Yeah, and I think this is where it all starts becoming kind of self-reinforcing. When you start taking that more comprehensive look at somebody's complete financial circumstances, you can slot the individual investments into the right place and indeed in the right vehicle, the right wrapper to get the optimum result.
And hopefully at the right time as well, because that's the other key part of this, is making sure that when one investment comes to an end, there's another one lined up and ready to go. Elite are very good at giving us notice of what is coming as well. So yeah, that is all part of it.
That's interesting you mentioned there about art investment, Paul, because just last night I had an email from one of our members who bought a piece of art following one of our recent events at the Royal Academy. And a very similar work, I think he paid something like 120,000 for this piece. And a very similar piece by the same artist from the same era had been auctioned last week, and it had gone for, I think the estimate had been around what he'd paid, 100 to 150, and it went for $500,000. Wow. So he's now feeling quite pleased with his art investment, so you just never know, do you? But anyway, for now, Paul Watson, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
So as you can see, Paul's really getting into this investing lark, especially with some of those high net worth kind of products that we can't really say too much about on a public channel like this. Next time we're going to talk to him about a particular kind of pension plan he uses as a financial engineering tool to really protect his wealth, but also to have maximum flexibility in what he can invest in. The government recently pledged another £20 billion to help the NHS. The slight problem is, where's it going to come from? Well, Spreadsheet Phil's probably working his magic at the moment, but one of the strange areas in which he might choose to make some changes is exactly how we apply VAT. Now, those of us who remember joining the European Union back in 1973 will remember that that's when value-added tax first came into being. We had a few traditions that go back to the 1850s, for example, not putting tax on printed materials because it was regarded as a tax on knowledge. So when the EU said that they did not recognize that tax on knowledge exemption, they said everything had to have VAT on it. So our politicians cleverly came up with a VAT rate of 0. So these things are taxed, but at 0%. Now that was all very well until we started having digital knowledge content like downloadable books that you put on your Kindle or magazines and newspapers that you can subscribe to online. Those now attract VAT at the full whack of 20%. So now we've got a lack of knowledge tax on printed books and newspapers, but you're paying that tax if you take those things in a digital format online. Is that fair? I would argue, no, it's not. They are both doing exactly the same job, they're just using a different medium. One is using print, it's chopping down trees to give it to us on paper. The other is doing it with bits and bytes in a computer or on a mobile handset, but it's all the same stuff, it's all the same content, it's all the same knowledge. So if they were to actually even things out, it would cost the government probably about 350 million a year in tax foregone, compared to, say, a penny on income tax, which would raise 5 billion a year. So doing that for 4 years would make the 20 billion pounds needed to support the NHS. Now, I don't know why we keep fiddling around the edges with these taxes. So many different taxes in this country, many of them raising a tiny amount of money, when 1 penny on income tax would raise 5 billion and get the job done. So I think we just need some politicians with the cojones to look at where the real numbers are, rather than saying let's squeeze the rich a little bit more. There just aren't enough of them to actually make that number up. If you want to make a big difference, and let's remember, everybody benefits from the NHS, whether you pay no tax, basic rate tax, or the highest rate of tax. We all benefit from the NHS, so why don't we all contribute to it? And the safest, fairest, fastest way of doing that would be to stick a penny on income tax. So he is my MP. Phil is the Weybridge MP, so I'll write him a letter saying, this is what you should do, Phil, to raise your 20 billion. And by the way, whilst you're on, could you please even up this discrepancy in knowledge-based products and remove VAT from digital learning materials? Thanks for watching 1% Weekly. If you like what you see, why not subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to click the bell so you get notified every time we broadcast a new program. Or if you just want to watch another video, how about this one? Are you going to make a choice then? Because I can't sort of stay here all day. I'm getting a bit, my hands are getting tired. So in your own time,